Beth for. It's good to be back on this panel. Get some all-stars. Yes, Linchpins of Liberty is an American leadership development enterprise. Our motto is to challenge the imagination of the rising generation. And we do this by mentoring high school and college students in conservative political philosophy, to give them a taste for freedom and the skills to be free. We filed our application with the IRS on January 3rd, 2011, seeking tax-exempt status as a 501c3 educational organization, an organization whose aims are to develop a moral imagination through the study of history. It wasn't until December 19th, 2013, 35 months after I filed my application, that the IRS granted us status. We are represented by the ACLJ. And it was too late. My organization was killed. In fact, it was really as if a lifeguard had tossed a life preserver to a swimmer who had already drowned. For it took 3 years, multiple tens of thousands of my own dollars, filing of a lawsuit, congressional testimony, major national media exposure, and along the way, the largest, most intimidating organization in all the world discriminated against me because of my point of view, seeking to condition my rights on how I chose to exercise them. Under threat of perjury, the IRS demanded that I disclose the identities of the students I teach, some of whom are minors. Now imagine if you were the parents of those children and you had entrusted them to me to mentor them. To what end does the government need to know the names of those students? One letter contained in excess of 95 questions, which all the organizations got. It was a template, which, by the way, Carter Hall testified last summer when he was asked by Lois Lerner's superiors to send out a template letter. He said that was inappropriate. These groups are not all the same, and they shouldn't be getting the same letter. Well, among those questions, in addition to asking me for my donor information, member information, they wanted to know my political view on every issue. Every issue. And they wanted to know the political affiliation of my own mentors. Clearly, I had been singled out according to the content of my speech, and it had come at great cost. I lost a $30,000 launch grant that was offered to me by a reputable nonprofit whose executive director advised me that never in his 25 years of making grants had he seen such treatment of a C3 applicant. As Cleta said, it shouldn't have taken more than 2 to 4 months. In fact, the average time that it took for a C3 to receive status before 2010 was between 2 and 4 months. And the nature of those questions was typically administrative. Have you filed your state articles of incorporation? Have you adopted a conflict of interest policy? 6 or 7 questions on one piece of paper, not 95 subparts of a question over 7 pieces of paper, which required 250 pages of response in 10 days. So this was the nature of the response, and at a time, when I first got my letter, it was 4 months into the process. I knew already that I had a target on my back. In fact, there was a friend of mine who was going to be one of my board members. He's a conservative, he's a family man, he thinks like we do, 7 children, homeschooler. Even he rolled his eyes at me as if I were mentioning some kind of conspiracy. And it wasn't until this past summer that he took me out for lunch after this whole thing hit the national media. And he apologized. He said, "Kevin, when you first told me that this was happening to you 2 years ago," he said, "I didn't believe you." I said, "I know, Jack." I said, "I saw it in your face and I wasn't going to take it any further." But that was, we even felt that among friends and among people who you think would view things the way that we do. But there were more costs to me. On the day after we testified June 4th, June 5th, I lost 75% of my business. Because my largest client advised me that they were uncomfortable with the very public expression of my political views in defense of my constitutional rights. And to make bad matters worse, Congressman Jim McDermott, Democrat from Washington, went on national television a few days later to suggest that I may have been lying before Congress simply because I wasn't under oath when I testified. Or perhaps Mr. McDermott was projecting, because I don't make a distinction whether or not I'm under oath.
Tax revenue. Now, why is that? 501c4s are advocacy organizations. It's anything from the National Rifle Association to the Sierra Club on both sides of the political aisle. And they are tax exempt for a very good reason. They're nonprofits. They exist on the money they get from their members and their donors. They're not a for-profit agency, so there's no reason to tax them, particularly because the money they're getting from their members and donors has already been taxed in the salaries of the people giving it. Now, the IRS said that it was doing this because it was examining the political activity of 501c4s, because the IRS has this rule in place, which it actually doesn't have statutory authority for, that says that if you're a 501c4, political activity can't be more than 50% of what you do. But let's assume for just a second that in fact the IRS determined that, you're actually 100% a nonprofit that engages in political activity. What would that mean? Well, it would mean that instead of being a 501c4, it would mean that you're a 527 organization. If you're a candidate, you run for office, and you start a campaign organization, that's a 527. 527s are also tax exempt. So there was no purpose in what they were doing with these applications other than to chill their activity. That was the only reason for it. And they were very effective in doing that, because anyone who's active in this area knows that what is the very first thing you do if you get a group of people together to form an organization like this? Well, you start a bank account, right? Well, you can't get a bank account unless you have what? A tax ID number, which means you've got to get your tax exempt status. So it causes all kinds of problems, and they were very effective in doing that. Now, the IG report, I think, listed 292 conservative organizations, and I think maybe 7 liberal organizations. I'm not sure why they were targeted. I guess maybe they didn't pay their dues to the DNC, and so the IRS went after them. Now, the point is, that was phase 1 of chilling political activity and political speech by groups who were critical of the president's policies and the things that he was doing in Washington. Phase 2 is now also being put into operation, and that is, last week was the closing date, as we just talked about, on public comments on these proposed new regulations that would completely chill the ability of any of these organizations, even after they're granted tax-exempt status, to be able to operate. And to show you how bad they are, I'll give you just one example. Under federal law, as regulated by the Federal Election Commission, where I used to be a commissioner, which regulates campaign finance law, if you're only a candidate if you're someone running for Congress or running for president. Well, the IRS regs would expand the definition of a candidate, and therefore candidate-related activity, to include any kind of nominees for office. So that means, for example, that in an election year, which we are this year, remember just yesterday, we had quite a debate and a vote over probably the most radical nominee that this president has put forward for the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department, where I used to work. He was fortunately defeated. But do you know, if you were a 501c4 organization under these new regs, if you talked or said anything about this nominee, that would be considered candidate-related political activity, which is, of course, totally ridiculous. Now, the way to do something about this is, first of all of the individuals at the IRS who were involved in this need to be fired. Of course, none of that has happened. Individuals at the IRS who broke the law should be prosecuted. Is that going to happen? Well, supposedly there's a criminal investigation going on. Those are normally handled by the public integrity section of the criminal division. They apparently are involved, but the lead lawyer is not the criminal section that always does these kind of public corruption cases. No, the lead lawyer on this is a lawyer from the Civil Rights Division, where I used to work, which is the most politicized division in the entire department, and it's being led by a lawyer who really has no experience in these kind of public corruption cases. On the other hand, she is a major donor to the Obama campaign, so I guess probably she'll have the right attitude about this. And we know that it's been 9 months since Attorney General Eric Holder announced the opening of an investigation. Now, I will tell you that I have been involved in literally hundreds of cases. Spent 4 years at the Justice Department, been a lawyer for a long time. one of the very first things you do in a case like this where there's been allegations of public corruption is you go and you talk to the victims first, because you want to find out the details of their dealings with the public officials who are being accused of corruption, so that when you then go talk to those public officials, you've got information that you can use to check what these public officials are telling you. At 9 months, and what, Kalita, the Justice Department finally talked to you last week, right?
They called me, like Jenny Beth, when I was announced that I was going to be testifying before Congressman Jordan's subcommittee of the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee on February 6th. I got a call and an email. I filed my testimony at 9:57 in the morning, and I received a phone call and a follow-up email from the Department of Justice saying, "We just want to be sure that you knew that we were trying to reach you." Seriously.
So the way to stop this is, one, there have to be repercussions for individuals who engage in this kind of behavior. And if there aren't, it'll simply happen again. Second, we have to stop these new regulations that are being proposed. And quite frankly, we need to change the existing regulations on 501c4s so that it's made very clear that when you're engaging in political activity, that in fact is an attempt to improve social welfare in this country. The IRS says that 501c4s, which are supposed to be dedicated to promoting social welfare, that if you engage in political activity, you're not doing that. Well, that is just ridiculous. In this country, with a government as powerful as it is, whether your issue is abortion, guns, welfare, public assistance, I don't care what it is, you cannot affect that or make changes in the public policy on that without engaging in political activity, because the government controls so much of our lives today. And that in itself is a problem, just basically even with the current existing law and current existing regulations.
Thank you, Hans.